The Pittsburgh Steelers rookie draft class may have the perfect set of mentors lined up for them to be groomed to become the next generation of great Steelers. I'll explain what I'm talking about there here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, also taking your questions on a Monday episode. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So let's get to my point here that I'm talking about. And something that, after the first week of OTAs, we're taking in our notes. We talked to players. We're going to have some clips of some of the Steelers from the locker room from the first week of OTAs to play for you. But something I was thinking about, and the more we talked to players about, it seemed like the Steelers have positioned most of their rookie draft class to have really good mentors above them, as far as players who've been Pro Bowlers or just high-profile players in the NFL, to kind of show them not only what it takes to succeed in the NFL, but what it takes to have sustained success in the NFL. You go down the board. The one exception you see is right at the top is Broderick Jones. Chukwuma Okorafor, Chooks, is being paid well by the Steelers in the NFL, but he's not a Pro Bowl guy. He's not a premier offensive tackle. He's been more of a solid veteran for the team so far. Dan Moore Jr., a third-year player from the fourth round, who's held his own and been solid, but again, is the Steelers are looking to replace him with Broderick Jones. But you look at every other position that they pretty much drafted. Joey Porter Jr. and Corey Trice, the seventh-round cornerback they got, both have Patrick Peterson to look up to, who the Steelers brought in free agency. Keeanu Benton has both Cam Heyward and Larry Ogunjobi to work with there. Darnell Washington has Pat Freiermuth, and you even have Nick Herbig, who has TJ Watt. And when we were talking to the veterans, about some of these players, there was some interesting some interesting points hit by some of these about the veterans talking about these guys and the upsides that they bring. TJ Watt even took time to tell us he's had a 2-year relationship with Nick Herbig, both of them, of course, being from Wisconsin. But he said Herbig reached out on his own to Watt years ago to try and learn from him. Here was TJ Watt when I asked him about Nick Herbig and their relationship on Thursday's OTA session at the Steelers locker room.
It's been cool. We've had many messages back and forth over the last 2 years. I've been able to see him develop and grow as a pass rusher. So I'm excited to have him in the room. I think we have 4 Badgers in the D-line room now, so it's pretty special. No, man, we're all grown men here. I'm just happy and proud of all the guys from Wisconsin that have been able to put in all the work to get to a point like this, and I'm just trying to do whatever I can to help guys develop their skills at the highest level.
Now, part of what TJ's talking about there with Wisconsin, with the Badger part of this, the Steelers have been adding a lot of Wisconsin guys to the defensive front. You think about both TJ Watt and Nick Herbig, but they've also drafted Keanu Benton, and Isaiah Loudermilk's also there. So that's a lot of Wisconsin products on the Steelers defense right now. But I think another aspect of what TJ Watt's talking about here is that he got to see the growth in Nick Herbig in his time watching him at Wisconsin. He admitted it wasn't like he watched him a whole lot, but when a guy reaches out to you from your alma mater, you might keep pace with him. And something that TJ Watt even talked about a little bit later that I wasn't able to include in this clip was about how Nick Herbig has kind of developed his pass rushing moves. TJ Watt, remember, transitioned to being an edge rusher and kind of had to learn how to do that consistently. He only had 1 year where he even registered sacks for Wisconsin. He played 8 years as a sophomore in 2015 and had 0 sacks. But then in 2016, he had 11.5. So he was able to show quick growth. And then the Steelers, of course, capitalized on that, brought him to the NFL, and he is now TJ Watt, the best edge rusher in the NFL. But Nick Herbig has a bit of a different path that he's been on. He's a guy who, when you look at his profile, he in his sophomore year in 2021, he had 9 sacks, bursting onto the scene also with 14.5 tackles for loss, also, and then had 11 sacks in 2022. So he was able to kind of be a more consistent presence in college and maybe pick up a few more things. And TJ Watt noted, yeah, he's asked me about pass rush moves. He's asked me about development. And I think these are things that are going to be interesting for the Steelers, is that you have guys that TJ Watt's not going to baby the guy. He's not going to be watching his every move, but he's going to be in the locker room and available for this guy, for Nick Herbig to kind of watch and just see. That's not only is that the guy that maybe I need to play like, that's how he acts like every day. And this is something that Tomlin talked about, that we talked about with Jenna Harner maybe a couple weeks ago, when Mike Tomlin came out and said part of the reasons the Steelers like to draft brothers is because when you have, or people that have family in that's already been to the NFL, when you grow up with someone who knows how to push you in the right way and kind of get the right things out of you to be an athlete, or you're feeling challenged like that all the time, it pushes you, it motivates you to do more of the right things, not just on the field and not just in practice, but off the field, eating the right way, training the right way, taking care of yourself the right way. And it's such an important part of the development of young players. And I think that's something you're going to get with all these guys. And that's not to say Broderick Jones is just left out of the cold. No one's just going to be able to help this guy. But I do think that it's a benefit to most of the guys that they drafted this year, and it puts them, the Steelers, in what I think a strong position to continue the development of guys like that. Listen to Patrick Peterson talk about Joey Porter Jr. and kind of like the excitement to see him grow when we spoke to him and asked him about Joey Porter Jr. back. This was on Wednesday of last week on the second practice of OTAs.
How many more years I have left? He's a rookie. At some point, the torch is going to be passed to him. So I just want to continue to help him, show him how to find his way, to find his resume, or what may help him throughout the week, because what may help him may be different from me. So I want to just continue to teaching him how to find his way to become a better athlete.
Can you tell his dad played in the league? Like, are there things that you see about him, like he gets this quicker than some other people?
Oh yeah, for sure. You could tell he came from a football background. Just his understanding of different schemes, different coverages, leverage, and just this competitive edge that he has as a rookie. You can just tell that he's a guy that wants to get better, that wants to be that guy eventually. And when you see guys like that, you just, like I say, just can't help but to point.
So part of that there with Patrick Peterson, you hear him talking about, you can hear he's not going to be there to tell Joey Porter Jr. or Corey Trice what to do at every turn, but he's there to be an example. And I think that that's something that people might not understand, is that when NFL athletes, their job isn't just showing up on game day or even just showing up to practice. It's making sure that you're ahead on everything. It's making sure you're studying over time. I've talked to people about Kenny Pickett's growth and part of the things that he would do. And Kenny Pickett reached out to, in fact, Pitt's current offensive coordinator, Frank Cignetti Jr., and they had a conversation, and they talked about, last year when Kenny Pickett wasn't getting starting reps, about how he could get ahead of the game. And one thing that Kenny Pickett would do is he would come in super early and he would go over all the plays, all the practice reps, to get all the mental reps in on his own, so that he knew everything that the Steelers were going to work on before the actual practice happened. And then that's something that he did there. And that's what I think Patrick Peterson is talking about, is that Joey Porter Jr. already understands a lot of things about football. Now it's just about showing him the extra things that you do to basically grow on how you know those things about football. And I think that's such a big part of what of the position the Steelers are in right now, that they have so many young guys that seem enthusiastic about football. They're football guys. It's something Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin both talked about before, during, and after the draft, was getting football guys. Between Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, all these guys that they drafted, they seem to love the game of football. They're not just talented guys who happen to be happy. They're happy that they're going to be making money in the NFL. They're guys that are committed to the game and committed to getting better in the game because they love the game. And part of that also is making sure that you're getting better at every hour. And I think that that's something that sometimes doesn't come to every rookie like that, or comes to every player like that. And I think that can only benefit the Steelers in the long run. We're going to continue on this discussion and start to take some of your questions, because you guys have been calling in to the Locked On Steelers podcast. We want to get some of your questions answered here on the Monday episode. Don't go anywhere. We'll do all of that. But first, before we do any of that, I want to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel, of course, the #1 sportsbook in America. You've got to get on the opportunities right now. The NBA playoffs continue right now. The final start on July 1st. Also, just a full thing ahead. I am recording this well in advance on Thursday evening. So if anything has happened with the NBA playoffs, or the Steelers for that matter, it's because I've had to record early for the holiday weekend. But for FanDuel Sportsbook, you can get ahead of the action by going there right now. And if you're a new customer, you can go benefit from being a new customer by signing up, and you can get what's called the No Sweat First Bet. And at FanDuel Sportsbook, the No Sweat First Bet gives you back $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet with FanDuel doesn't hit. And that to sign up for that, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. You'll claim your no sweat first bet. You can bet on anything from who you think is going to win it all, from who you think is going to score the most in any points in a game. You can even set up parlay bets. There's a whole bunch of different options for you on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Don't miss your shot at a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our episode here and talking more about the rookie situation, and I think the benefits that the Steelers have right now from the roster they have. And again, you go across the board to Keeanu Benton, who plays defensive line, and he's an enthusiastic guy, and he seems excited to be with the Steelers, and he shows a lot of upside. But this is also a guy who is going to be playing behind Cam Heyward and Larry Ogunjobi. Ogunjobi, a long-term veteran in the NFL, and of course Cam Heyward, who right now I believe is what I'd call Mr. Steeler. And if you follow this podcast, you know I give the Mr. Steeler title to people who embody what it means to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, both as a leader and as a personality. They don't put themselves first. They put the team first. They're all about that. And I think Cam Heyward's kind of carried that torch for quite some time. I thought Heath Miller was kind of Mr. Steeler for a bit there. Back in the day, it would have been Jerome Bettis or Hines Ward, those type of guys. Troy Polamalu would be a Mr. Steeler. There's the guys that embody that, and I think Cam Heyward is that. And I think that that's a perfect position for a guy like Keeanu Benton to learn behind from. And, you know, even with Joey Porter Jr., we know that Joey Porter Sr. has been part of that. If you want more about Joey Porter Sr. and what he's doing to help Joey Porter Jr. be ready for the NFL, I suggest you go check out all things covered by between Bryant McFadden and Patrick Peterson, a great podcast between the two of them that brought on Joey Porter Sr. And he talked about the whole points and the strategies behind why he was trying to help his son get ready for the NFL by knowing what to expect in those lights. And I think, again, this is part of what Mike Tomlin likes about guys who have people in their lives to show them the way to the NFL and the way how to stay in the NFL. Because it's not just enough to get there. It's not great. It's not good enough just to be happy that you made it to the NFL. It's also all about making sure that you're doing everything you can to continue to improve your craft. And, you know, I think that they have a lot of guys in the locker room right now who embrace that. They embrace the process of getting better. They embrace the process of being part of a good to great team and wanting to be great and not just settling for being good. And I think that that's part of, with this young nucleus, what they're hoping can kind of, I guess, build into something that could be truly special for the Steelers in the long run. So that's why I wanted to include clips of Watt and Patrick Peterson. I'm sure it's not the last thing we're going to hear from a lot of guys coming up. Cam Heyward spoke early in the week as well. You know, there's a lot of different things we'll continue to track here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. And OTAs do start up again on Tuesday. So we'll be back in the facility covering that. But again, as I said during the ad, I am recording this episode on Friday. So if there's something that happens, we'll get to it, later. But if something has happened since Friday before this episode comes out midnight Eastern time going into Monday, I apologize for it not being covered, but I have a trip that's coming up, and I wanted to make sure this episode was done and clear so that you guys had content on the Locked On Steelers channel before I left. But let's get to some of your questions, and we're going to start off a question that was tied to the Steelers rookie situation, and it's a question about Joey Porter Jr. and who he'll face, and it's our man Nate Glass, one of our best question askers out there from Los Angeles. Here's Nate with a question about Joey Porter Jr. and some of the receivers he might face.
How you doing, Chris? Nate Glass from California. My question is about the cornerbacks and the Bengals wide receivers. This upcoming season, I know we got Joey Porter Jr., and let's just assume that he's one of the starting cornerbacks. Who do you feel that he's a better matchup for against the Bengals? T. Higgins or Jamar Chase? Your thoughts on that? Both these guys have burned us in the past, and I'm just trying to figure out who Joey Porter, with his size and physicality, trying to figure out who you think he will match up better against. Thanks for taking my call. Have a good day. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Nate, for your question. As always, you can call in for a question at 412-223-6644. And if you call in with a question and donate at least $10 to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation campaign that we have going on with this show, you can get your question guaranteed to be answered on air within a week of your call. So thanks again, Nate, for the question. Now, I will say this. I don't think the Steelers are planning that far ahead. I don't think that they're looking at trying to match up Joey Porter Jr. with someone right now. I think as a rookie, if he was to take the field, I think the Steelers, we talked to Patrick Peterson. He said he's training right now to be the left cornerback. I think the Steelers might be in a situation where they line up guys and they just take on who they take on. Now, Joey Porter Jr. may someday graduate to the level where he is a traveling cornerback, where he just goes with whoever the other team's number one guy is. That's what Ike Taylor did for the Steelers for years. But not everyone does that. Some people don't believe in that. Some people feel like it's just a system. I think that with the Steelers situation at cornerback, Patrick Peterson, I think, is an all-time cornerback and one of the better of this generation. But, he's on the tail end of his career. I think Levi Wallace is a solid cornerback. I think Joey Porter Jr. could be a very good to even great corner someday. But all of those guys that you're talking about lining up on the outside, none of them, I think, are the definitive like shutdown corners the way that Ike Taylor was for the Steelers in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And some people might remember like, whoa, wait a second, what do you mean Ike Taylor shut down? Well, go back to some of those late 2000s teams and what he was doing to receivers all across the field. Go back and look what Chad Ochocinco and at the time Chad Johnson was doing to opponents, and then look what he did to the Steelers whenever Ike Taylor would play him, and his stats would just fall off a cliff. That's what I think the Steelers are going to be waiting for. So I don't think Joey Porter Jr. is going to be matched up specifically with anyone, Nate, to be honest. I think that if he starts, he's going to be given one side of the field and said, hey, just do your job on this side of the field. Whoever you line up with, here's your responsibility. Stick to that. I think that maybe if he shows that how to do that well and he shows some real progress, then he'll be in that situation. Then you can ask him to start traveling with guys. But I think that might still be 2, 3, maybe even 4 years down the line before the Steelers get to that point. And who knows what the secondary will even look like at that point, because I imagine that Minkah Fitzpatrick would be, on the back end of his new deal. And you'd have, you definitely have a new cornerback in there for Patrick Peterson. You wonder where Levi Wallace would be. But point being, I think that's getting a little ahead of the game right now. The Steelers at this point, especially with OTAs, they're just trying to get settled in, get these guys used to the defensive calls, get them used to switches. And you brought this up as an if, or assuming if Joey Porter Jr. wins the starting job, he's going to have to take that off of Levi Wallace. And Levi Wallace was pretty solid last year. I believe he had 4 interceptions. He was a good corner. Now, he wasn't the shutdown guy. He wasn't the guy that took everything away, but he was able to make good plays on the ball. And we've talked to him in OTAs, and he's made some more good plays on the balls in OTAs as he's told us at his locker. So I think Levi Wallace isn't just going to give up that spot, and that's even fine if Joey Porter Jr. has to sit a little bit and watch from the sidelines as those two veterans kind of duke it out, because I think those two veterans are very reliable guys who can hold down their positions. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing as long as Joey Porter Jr. develops into eventually that guy that takes over the starting cornerback position and becomes a premier corner for you. That'll be that is the goal here, the long-term goal. So like I said, a little early for trying to match them up with the Bengals, especially when the Steelers don't play the Bengals until like week 12 or something like that. So I think that their primary focus is going to be getting these guys up and ready to go to take on to kind of run the plays as is and then see who's the best fit from there on moving forward. So with that being said, I want to take one more quick break. When we come back, 2 more questions that were called in that I have time to answer on the show. We'll get to them in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Don't go anywhere. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, and we're continuing our show here on a Monday, and we're going to take some of your questions here. Again, you can always call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under mid. We'll try and get you on the show. And if you donate at least $10 to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, you'll get your question answered at least within at least a week on the show. So let's move on here for a minute and let's take another question. This question comes from Larry Rosenthal all the way out in Westfield, New Jersey. Here's Larry's question, and it's again about the rookies.
Hey, Mr. Carter. My name is Larry Rosenthal. I'm calling from Westfield, New Jersey. Love the show. Thank you very much for all the insight. My question has to do with rookie contracts. They keep talking about rookies not being signed or negotiating, but I don't understand how they have any negotiating power, really. It's kind of like you're drafted, you got to go to that team. What options do you have other than that? So can you give me some insight into how that works? I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry, for the question. Appreciate you asking that. This is one of those things, actually, I personally don't understand myself because rookie numbers are kind of set beforehand, right? And you go to spotrack.com, one of the places that tracks cap numbers across the board, and like Broderick Jones slated as a cap hit for $3,022,973 right now. I think this is more about formalities, signing deals when they sign deals, negotiations. Front offices are busy, and I think that is one thing that people need to remember is that I think it's less about actual negotiations or anything like that, and maybe there's some other things in the background that are going on. I'm not going to pretend to know that, but I will tell you this: front offices are consistently busy. And like, as we've seen, the Steelers front office is still busy. They just signed Marcus Golden to a 1-year deal. And I'm still of the mind that they're actually talking about signing another player or finding another way to get another player, especially for this defense at the linebacker role. And this wasn't a call-in question, but I've seen this question posed to me a lot. I haven't responded to it other than just to say like, hey, I don't that needs to actually happen first before I see anything. But I'll talk to you guys about my thoughts on the idea of trading for Cardinals linebacker Isaiah Simmons. Now, part of this also is, very speculative. Isaiah Simmons, for those who might not know, linebacker for the Cardinals, really athletic coming out of the draft, was a guy who was highly regarded as a guy who could be, a big future playmaker at the linebacker position. He was a first round pick for the Cardinals, and they have now turned down the chance to give him his 5th-year extension. So, this is a guy who was picked 8th overall in 2020 out of Clemson, and he had the athleticism to kind of look like a playmaker who could even play like a little bit like Ryan Shazier with his ability to kind of move across the field, use his size and speed at the right capacity. Now, thing is that Isaiah Simmons hasn't exactly had the best career so far with the Cardinals. And again, he hasn't been terrible. He just hasn't lit it up for them in the way that an 8th overall pick should. You go back even at most recent years, he did have 2 interceptions last year. He had 7 passes defensed, 4 sacks, 99 tackles, and contributing there, but not a game breaker the way that he was drafted. And the Cardinals, they've paid Kyler Murray, they've paid Budda Baker, and there's his situation as well to look after. Maybe the Cardinals are thinking about some things here. So the question that I've been getting a lot in the YouTube comment section and Twitter everywhere is, Chris, why don't the Steelers trade for Isaiah Simmons? Well, you know what? That could be an interesting idea if the Steelers wanted a 1-year rental on a guy that maybe they wouldn't want to keep around. And it depends on what they would have to give up to get him, because I think the Cardinals might be willing to move on from him from, say, a 4th-round pick, and maybe that's what's worth it. But I think the Steelers are in a position where they would want to know more about Isaiah Simmons, the person, and kind of get a chance to kind of touch base with him before they kind of committed to giving up a draft pick to bring him into the organization, and seeing how he fits in there, because Isaiah Simmons could be a guy that could help maybe a little bit more in coverage, because the Steelers right now, as far as their linebackers go, they're all run stopping thumpers, and I think that could be where Isaiah Simmons fits in if they find a way to make that trade work. I don't think it should cost anything huge for the Steelers. They need to find a way to kind of keep their young nucleus going. I also think with the way that they've been developing, they have a lot of things going for them, and they can kind of get back to just drafting in their positions and focusing on bringing in young players who can bolster the roster through the draft. And maybe Isaiah Simmons just needs a new change of pace there, a new place to kind of figure things out. And it's certainly worked before, where players just couldn't get things going in there with their first team, and then found the right team to make it work and become a really good player. I think that maybe that could work out, but I do think the Steelers are going to be looking around. They're going to be considering all options, because there's still guys like Deion Jones available, who another experienced athletic linebacker who could maybe play at the position and be solid. So I think they have some options available to them. They're just kind of exploring how things go, and I think they know that there's not that much of a rush in the situation right now. OTAs are happening for everyone in the NFL, and I think people are, kind of taking their time. They want to see what they have. Cole Holcomb, is kind of like dealing with an injury, and he's kind of recovering right now. Landon Roberts and Mark Robinson, your primary linebackers. I think they're letting these guys kind of see how they do, how they fit in, and how they float around. And then I think the Steelers maybe they make a move, during OTAs. Maybe they do it afterwards, getting ready for training camp. But I think that right now it's not as pressing of a time to do that. So thank Larry for his question, and I thank everyone for always asking me questions at all times. But let's get to another question that was actually called in, and that was from another one of our friends, Patrick from Cape Cod in Massachusetts, who was asking about special teams.
Hey, Chris. This is Patrick here from Massachusetts, Cape Cod here. I was wondering, we haven't talked too much about the special teams for the Steelers, which was so strong for so many years and just seemed kind of lacking, at least last year and the year before. I know we have Olszewski, but not really, a dependable kick returner in my mind. Let me know what you think.
So he said, let me know what you think, but thank you for your question, Patrick. We appreciate everyone who calls into the show. Let's go across the board on special teams and talk about a few things. One, we talk about strength as far as things go. Let's start with Chris Boswell. And Chris Boswell did kind of fall off a little bit last year, did deal with some injuries, and made only 71% of his field goals, which was the second lowest of his career. But I remember back in 2018, when he was struggling and he hit only 65% of his field goals. I remember being on the Final Word, Channel 11. We have Jenna Harner on from them all the time on this show. And I remember being asked, a question was posed with the 2 other people that were on the panel with me at the time. And they were like, he's done. He stick a fork at him and he's finished. It's all over. Kickers don't recover from bad years. And I'm like, what, based on what are you talking about? Like, this guy just made, the year before, he just made the most kicks in an NFL playoff game in the history of the league, when he made 6 against the Chiefs because the Steelers couldn't find the end zone against Andy Reid, and they won that game. In fact, that's still the last playoff game that they won. again, you look at most years, Chris Boswell has been dominant. He kicked for 90% his first year in 2015, 84% the year after that, 92% in 2017, 93.5% in 2019, 95% in 2020, and 90% in 2021. There are only 3 years where he's kicked lower than 90% in his time in the NFL. And only 2 years where it's been below 84%. So again, I think that he's totally fine there. Now, the big question, so I think that, keep an eye on him, but they'll give him the grace to show that he's still the man in Pittsburgh. And I think that he will bounce back. Now, the big question, of course, is the punt game with Presley Harvin. He averaged 41.4 net yards per punt, and that ranked 20th of all punters in the NFL. I don't anticipate the Steelers to give him any breaks. I know that he had a really rough rookie season, and he needed to, and he dealt with lots of, multiple major losses in his family, and they took some coping. And he showed a little bit of improvement, but still, he's not at the level that they hoped he would be when they spent a 7th round pick on him. Not that 7th round picks are all that, but still, they were hoping that he would be the guy. This guy was the best punter in college football a few years ago. Again, I've talked about this, but I covered Presley Harvin when he was at Georgia Tech and he was playing against Pitt. And I remember just so many possessions, Pitt's defense would pin Georgia Tech within its own 10-yard line, and then Presley Harvin would boom it, and it would be in the other end zone. And that's just how strong of a leg that he had. And you looked at all his punts from that year, he would be really strong there. I think that Presley Harvin's running out of time when it comes to proving himself as a punter. They brought in Braden Mann, to battle with him, and that's going to be something just to watch. How do these guys perform throughout training camp, throughout OTAs, throughout mini camp? There's going to be so many different things to watch there, but I think that's the most legitimate battle as far as the kicking aspects of special teams are here right now. I know the Steelers brought in BT Potter at the kicker position, but I think Chris Boswell's safe. Now, returner, which you brought up, by the way, Peter, in your question, or Patrick, excuse me, in your question. And that is a good question because Gunnar Olszewski didn't light it up last year and didn't protect the football last year. So I think that that's very much on the table right now, and that's something the Steelers are going to consider. So if I'm the Steelers right now, I'm certainly looking at all faces who could come in and help with the return man job. Anthony McFarland, I think, is a guy that could be looked at there a little bit. Calvin Austin, for his speed, could be looked at there. I think the days of Deontay Johnson doing it are done because he's, a wide receiver 1 and they want to protect him. But those are my prime suspects right now as far as guys who could fill that job. And who knows, maybe Gunnar Olszewski improves and shows that he can do it. But I personally think that Calvin Austin could be a perfect player for this if he's able to lock it down, because his explosiveness and speed in open space could truly be dangerous and break games open. And that's what you want out of a returner. One, protect the football. That's the primary thing you want. Don't turn the ball over. Don't mess things up and for the rest of the team, but have those 1 or 2 plays a year where you break something open and you get your team a boost in a key moment where your offense doesn't have to, get out there and make the big play. And sometimes you can. And I do think Calvin Austin should be looked at there in the return game, but we have to see how that plays out. Long way before we get there. The Steelers could even sign someone between now and training camp that might turn into the return man. A lot of things can happen there, but good question. We will keep an eye on that in special teams. There's just so many things about the Steelers that it's tough to get to special teams because it's just, it's special teams. It's the extra part of football. Well, we'll get to a lot more things on the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, if something has happened and this show didn't cover it, I apologize. I had to record this episode late Thursday night to have it ready for Monday morning because I wasn't going to be available over the weekend. But we hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that you enjoyed your weekend. And I'll be back Tuesday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And check me out here on the Locked On Steelers podcast Monday through Friday every week with bonus episodes as well, sometimes on the weekend and whenever there's breaking news. And we thank you again for checking us out. We'll be back on your screens and in your ears on Tuesday as we get back into the second week of OTAs.